Welcome to Earth and Kind Quests. My name is Mike, and this video shares my approach with wilderness exploration maps in Dungeons & Dragons, and generally in fantasy games and adventures. I like to use exploration zones that can be similar to a hexcrawl style, but without using a hex grid format. My approach with exploration zones is based on the properties of mapping space, but without necessarily using fixed grid lines. You could apply exploration zones with a square grid, a hex grid, or no grid. In some of my other videos, you may have seen examples of maps with exploration zones. Usually, these zones are configured as concentric rings around a primary goal. Sometimes they are organized as a chain or other arrangement of circles, ovals, or other shapes. The core concept is for the characters to proceed through the zones with increasing amount of danger or challenge along the way toward a goal. The number of zones can mirror the concept of a 3-room dungeon, a 5-room dungeon, or whatever number of encounters will be suitable in your adventure. The characters can encounter warning signs about the dangers of proceeding, and then they can experience those dangers, learn how to cope with them, and potentially leverage this experience toward the final goal. The characters can travel in whatever direction and path that they will choose, but they always will pass through the series of zones. Often, characters will find ways to bypass a zone, and possibly more than one zone. In these cases, the characters can proceed more quickly toward the adventuring goal, yet they could be missing some of the relevant information or special items that otherwise could be helpful for them. Within each zone, I prepare the information of what the environment looks like, and then I prepare one encounter. The general environmental information typically involves the geological landforms and features, the plants and animals, and the water resources. These aspects could be beneficial in some ways, yet I like to include potential hazards such as pits of quicksand, unstable ground with sinkholes or rock slides, and giant-size or monstrous versions of plants and animals. When I design the formal encounter within a zone, then the location could be anywhere. It is not fixed into any single mapped location. The characters will experience this encounter whenever they pass through the zone. I can shift the location to occur wherever might be most effective. A random dice roll can decide how many hours or how many days will pass before the encounter will occur. I like to allow another random dice roll to decide about a unique complication or quirk that could be positive or negative. In any case, the nature of the encounter usually will change depending on what the characters have done up to this point, especially if they are being attentive to their surroundings, scouting in advance, and planning their next steps. The encounter could be a natural hazard, or it could be anything else. It could involve a combination of factors. The characters could identify a camouflaged bandit hideout, a group of patrol guards moving toward them, or something different or unusual that attracts their attention. Perhaps the encounter area happens to include pits of quicksand or distributions of carnivorous plants. The characters can decide how to manage the situation, or perhaps to avoid it. If the characters will engage with the encounter, then they should learn information or obtain special items that will become relevant towards succeeding in the larger goal or quest. Otherwise, a completely random encounter will distract from the adventure, and often it will feel incompatible and contrived, resulting in even more distraction from the intended focus. With these cautions in mind, you can find inspiration in the random encounter tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or in other creative content. I encourage to make your own decisions and adjustments in order for the encounter to make sense and to fulfill a meaningful purpose with your adventuring narrative and themes. I prepare a few variations for an encounter. Ideally, I can compose a few variations of maps, or I can prepare one basic map with options to change the internal components. Even when I prepare just one map, then I always can change the number of creatures and their challenge rating. Additionally, I can decide about adding fog obscurement, hidden pit traps or poisoned dart traps, or patches of brown mold, green slime, or yellow mold. As the characters proceed through the adventuring zones, they face increasing level of challenge. Simultaneously, the experience should help towards succeeding in the final goal. The relevance of each encounter experience probably is the most difficult aspect for most content creators. Typically, the characters will learn about the natural hazards of the environment, and then they will know what to do whenever they will encounter the same or similar features during an assault against a bandit hideout, or during a battle inside a dragon's lair. The characters can learn about the local history and lore when they investigate the remains of previous unfortunate adventurers, the ruins of old statues and structures, and the fragments of decayed scrolls and engraved stone slabs. Often the characters will face the roaming patrols of guards or other minions who are related to a principal antagonist or group residing at the final adventuring zone, and then later the characters can be prepared already for this final confrontation. As more tangible rewards along the way, the characters should be able to acquire potions of healing, special weapons, and other items that will help them during their adventure. Repeatedly, people have told me that these exploration zones or adventuring zones appear to be like a classic hexcrawl. The only major difference is that a hexcrawl involves fixed locations and boundaries of each hex grid space. In principle, when the characters move from one hex polygon to another, then they will encounter only what was prepared or rolled randomly for that specific hex polygon, and not for any other place in the map. During a hex crawl, the characters could miss important encounters, unless they will pass through numerous hex polygons that eventually will build a larger picture, but not necessarily a complete picture. In my approach, these zones allow for the characters to experience all of the relevant components that will contribute toward the larger goal or quest. If you want to move a character across a map, then you could count the numbers of squares or hex polygons that represent the distance. Alternatively, you could use any kind of measuring device to move in any direction regardless of the grid lines. When the characters travel across a map space, then I assign a radius around the group. If someone will scout ahead or explore back and forth across the area, then the radius of scouting information can extend for a few miles. If the group will prefer to move in a single line path, then the travel pace could be faster, yet with much smaller radius of awareness. In a hexcrawl, characters can explore through a hex polygon, usually measured a few miles across. The characters can gather information about one hex polygon and then move into any adjacent polygon. Alternatively, they can decide not to explore and instead to move ahead at a quicker pace. If you feel that the adventuring zones are too restrictive and railroading the characters through a pre-decided script, then you can arrange the zones differently. You might prefer a hex grid format. I would consider two options. First, I might arrange a set of zone polygons with open spaces between them, thereby lessening the burden of preparing for each adjacent grid space one by one. Second, I would keep in mind that the prepared encounter for each zone can include multiple variable components and iterations. The characters always will influence what happens. Characters could avoid encounters. They could create extra complications. They could experience more than one encounter within a zone. In my view, the exploration zones or adventuring zones allow for the characters to experience a sensible, focused, and coherent narrative progression of an adventure working toward a goal or quest. What are your thoughts about hexcrawls, exploration zones, and other approaches? Please share in the comment section. As always, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.